Life is a winding road, no telling where it goes.
Hey guys, Amber here with a Meeple family, and if you know me, you know I love solo games, and I was really excited to check out this game called Weavlings in the Wild. So this game is actually live on Kickstarter right now, and I'm going to go ahead and walk you through how this game works to see if it's a good fit for your gaming table. If you'd like to support Weavlings in the Wild and go ahead and back this game, I do have a link in the description of this video so you can check that out as well. Let's jump right in to Weavlings in the Wild and set up the game. To get started, the first thing you're going to want to do is remove this Trapper card as well as the Player Aid card and just set those aside for a moment. Go ahead and shuffle the Weavlings in the Wild deck. The first thing we're going to do is set up our Tender Wilds. This is a 4x3 grid of face down cards, which we will later turn face up, but they do need to start out face down. One of the very first things we need to do is have a starting location for our Trapper. In order to do this, go ahead and randomly select a starting location for your Trapper, and you'll simply replace that face down card with your Trapper. You can go ahead and reveal this card, and it's actually going to start off your discard pile. At this point, game setup is complete, so we can go ahead and reveal the face down cards and really see what we're dealing with in the Tender Wilds. Now, in addition to setting up the Tender Wilds, you are going to need room on your table for a few other piles we're going to be creating. So we've already started our discard pile. Discarded cards at some point, if needed, will be reshuffled to create your Tender Wilds deck again. But we're also going to need room for a banished pile, and these are cards that are going to be permanently removed from the game. You'll also need room for a lured pile. In order to win the game, we need to lure these little weavlings into our lured pile, and our goal is to lure at least 10 of them to win the game. And there's two more piles you're going to need, which is a lost population, which is where weavlings go if a beastie has eaten them or if we've lost them due to a certain phase in the game. And you're also going to need a wounds pile. This pile will of course hold beasties who have inflicted wounds upon us. If either the lost population pile or wounds pile reaches 10, then we lose the game. Weavlings in the Wild is played over 4 phases, and we can conveniently see those listed here on our Player Aid card. So let's go over each of these phases in detail so you can see how the game operates. The very first phase we need to do is the Trapper phase. So during the Trapper phase, you can see here on our Trapper card that we have the ability to do 3 actions. I'm going to briefly go over each of these, but just to give you an overview, you can move 1 space, collect traps, or use traps. Now, during the move phase, your Trapper can move orthogonally. And in order to move your Trapper, you're simply going to switch the Trapper with the card in the space that you would like to move to. And that would be considered 1 action. The other thing you're able to do on your turn is collect traps. Now, in order to collect traps, you actually need to be adjacent to the trap. And you can collect 1 trap for 1 action. These traps will be held in your hand until you're ready to use them. Now, it's important to note that anytime you remove a card from the Tender Wilds, the column is going to collapse downwards, and you will refill the empty space with a face-down card from the deck. During the Trapper phase, you can also gain adjacent wild spirits. Now, these don't actually cost you actions, but they do grant you special abilities that are going to help you throughout the game. These will also just remain in your player hand until you're ready to utilize them. Now, as you can see here, one of the last options we have during the Trapper phase is to use a trap. Following the directions on your trap card, you are able to trap beasties. For instance, this rolling log trap allows me to discard all cards in a column from the Tender Wilds and capture beasties. After you use traps, they're going to go in your banished pile. Beasties that you collect from using your trap will remain in your hand as meat. And you can see that each of these beasties are worth varying amounts of meat. This beastie is worth 2 and this one worth 1. The meat from these beasties will be used to lure weavlings. Once we've completed the Trapper phase, we're ready to move on to the second phase, which is the lure weavlings phase. Now, each weavling has an associated meat cost tied to it, and as long as you have the meat from catching beasties in your hand, you'll be able to discard that and lure the weavling. So this particular weavling can be lured for 2 meat, and I have a beastie here that is valued at 2 meat. So I'll simply discard that Beastie and lure this Weavling. This Weavling is going to allow my population of Weavlings to reach a level of 2. So I need to get to a level of 10, but this will greatly help me reach that goal. Once you've lured the Weavlings, it's time to move on to phase 3, which is the Beasties feed phase. Now, in order to determine which Beastie will feed first, we need to look at these lightning bolt icons on the Beastie cards. Above that icon is a number, and Beasties are going to feed in order from lowest to highest. So, based on the Beasties we currently have in our Tender Wilds, this number 4 Beastie would actually feed first. Now, Beasties always feed based on their chomp icons on their card. Each Beastie has a different orientation of these chomp icons. So, using that, we can determine that this Beastie actually has no Weavlings to feed upon. And it's important to note that Beasties only feed on Weavlings. Beasties that don't feed are going to remain right where they are in the Tender Wilds. Now, the next Beastie to feed would be this number 9 here, and I can see based on the chomp icons, they are going to feed on these 3 Weavlings here. Now, those Weavlings are going to be added to our lost population, which currently is at 3. And remember, if this ever reaches 10, we lose the game. Now, Beasties that are able to feed are going to be discarded, and we'll go ahead and refill. Once all of our Beasties have finished feasting upon Weavlings, it's time to move on to phase 4, which is our travel phase. So thematically during the travel phase, it's like we're moving deeper into the Tender Wilds, and basically what we're going to do is discard and remove the bottom row of cards in our Tender Wilds. Now, there are a couple cards not affected by this, and one of those is the Trapper card, as well as any face down cards. For us, it's pretty simple because we are just going to need to remove the outer cards on our row. Now, different card types are going to be allocated to different piles during this phase of the game. Beasties are actually converted to wounds, and there is a wound wheel in the center of the Beastie cards. Whatever number is at the top of the card is the wound amount that is inflicted upon you. So for this particular wound, we will receive 1. And remember, if this reaches 10, we lose the game. If Weavlings are in this bottom row, they are going to be discarded and added to the lost population stack that we have. If there are traps in the bottom row, then they are going to be banished from the game, and wild spirits will be discarded. At this point, we can go ahead and reveal all the face down cards. And now we're ready to start our next turn with phase 1, the Trapper phase. Gameplay will continue just like this until the conclusion of the game, which is when you've either lured 10 Weavlings, lost 10 Weavlings, or received wounds valued at 10 or more. I also want to touch on event cards, so let's briefly talk about these. Now, in my opinion, I think these are great to add in after you're very familiar with gameplay, because these can make the game a little swingy and cause you to move through your deck much faster, making the game that much more challenging. Now, anytime that these event cards show up on the Tender Wilds, you're going to need to immediately satisfy these. For instance, let's look at the Blood Moon here. If this shows up on the Tender Wilds, you're simply going to draw through your deck until a Vargler is drawn. Once a Vargler appears, you will simply discard the event Blood Moon and replace it with the Vargler. But as you can see, that is a devastating way to blow through your Tender Wilds deck. The other event cards include Sunlight and the Full Moon. The Full Moon is very similar. It's going to cause you to move through that deck a little quicker, whereas the Sunlight is actually going to have you move deeper into the Tender Wilds by moving all cards down one row. Now, at some point during the game, you are going to run out of cards. And when this happens, you'll simply shuffle the discard pile to create a refresh deck. Now, there is some penalty involved every time you refresh your deck. All wounds you've collected will rotate 90 degrees counterclockwise. This is going to actually increase the wound that you received. So instead of this Vargler being worth 1 wound, it is now worth 2. It's also important to note that every time you refresh the deck, your cards are going to continue to rotate, increasing that wound strength. In addition to that, any new wounds you receive throughout the game are going to have to match the current orientation of your wound deck. So instead of adding this Vargler now for 0, it's automatically going to be added for 1 wound. Now, in addition to our wounds being affected when we refresh our deck, we also have our lovely little lured weavlings here who will also be affected. Now, as you can see, when we've lured these weavlings, their happy wheel shows that they are super satisfied and happy. But when we refresh our deck, we also have to rotate these 90 degrees. And now we can see that one of our weavlings has a broken heart. In order to keep this weavling satisfied, we need to pay 1 meat for this weavling. If we're unable to do that, then this weavling has to join the lost population. Now, similar to when we collect wounds, we need to match the orientation. This same thing goes for lured weavlings. If I were to collect weavlings and my weavling lured population is oriented this way, I have to orient all new weavlings to the same direction. And I can see here that that is going to cause this weavling to be unhappy, which means instead of paying 1 meat to lure this weavling, I have to pay 2. If for some reason you're unable to satisfy that extra payment of meat for these unhappy little weavlings, then you're not able to lure them. And that's a quick overview of how to play this solo game called Weavlings in the Wilds. Well, as always with these videos, I hope this helped you really get a good feel for how this game works. This is a really great solo game, and honestly, I am in love with these little weavlings. I think the artwork is super well done and so fun and whimsical. I really enjoy playing this, and I love that the designer gave these cards some multi-purposes. I feel like that really makes the game fun and unique. I really also love the fact that you really have to think about moving through these cards too fast. And I have to say, these event cards are really challenging. I have had them ruin the game for me. I almost enjoy playing without these more than I do with them, but they do add that extra challenge. You never know when they're going to come up. And, you know, sometimes I've had them come up and it's no big deal, where sometimes they've come up later towards the end of my deck, and boy, they are catastrophic. So I definitely recommend playing a few games without these and then adding them in later, because I think you can just develop better strategies before these really decimate your deck. Well, overall, this is a game I've really enjoyed playing, so I was super excited to share it with you guys and just give it a little bit more attention. At the filming of this video, I do believe it is fully funded, but if you don't want to miss out on this Kickstarter, I will put a link down in the description and you guys can check that out. As always, would love for you to give this video a thumbs up and be sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys later.
Life is a winding road, no telling where it goes.